As we have been discussing this week, the secret to Sigmar's eternal war is the reforging process. The act of reclaiming the soul material from a fallen Stormcast, recreating a physical shell for them, and sending them back into battle. This is the ultimate weapon that Sigmar went back to Azyr during the Age of Chaos and sealed the door. This is what he was trying to develop. It was what makes his war engine possible. But what is the nature of reforging and who actually does it? And today we're going to be discussing that as we dive into the Sacrosanct Chamber. Now before we begin, I just want to clarify that this chamber did not magically appear out of nowhere. They've actually been working in the background of the narrative this entire time. Even though we haven't met any of their characters in the stories, we have seen characters be reforged and come back from that. Well, they were instrumental in that process, because they are the ones who labor over the Anvil of Apotheosis and reforge Stormcasts. And they work tirelessly to do that. The amount of souls coming in through the escalating conflict is only growing larger. And while they've always been present in the story in some way, they've never entered combat themselves in mass. Well, the events of Soul Wars have brought these troops, this chamber, to the battlefield. Without spoiling any of the contents of the novel Soul Wars by Josh Reynolds, the Anvil of Apotheosis, or at least the location where it is at, called Sigmarabulum, was severely damaged thanks to the Necroquake. This wall of magic smashed into that entire structure like a huge wave hitting a lighthouse. It did all kinds of damage, destroyed structures, cracked and tumbled buildings, souls that were about to be reforged that weren't quite there yet, went mad and just went ballistic. It was a really great scene in that book, and it explains why they are not needed at the forge at this exact second. Because once upon a time, the Sacrosanct Chamber was dedicated to more scholarly pursuits. They were to repair and maintain the war effort rather than participate in it. Their secondary role was to slowly seek ways to fix or stop the curse, meaning the degradation of the soul that happens after many reforgings. As we've mentioned multiple times, reforging is an imperfect process. They're trying to fix the cracks in the system. But now that their main duty has kind of been put on hold because of the destruction of Sigmarabulum, they are entering the battlefield. And being masters of the arcane, they have a lot to offer the war effort. They act mostly as investigators on Nagash's plans, and with their boots on the ground they can do a more aggressive search for the cure to the curse. While doing so, they also reinforce any Stormcast Eternal units, while their primary duty is being restored, meaning the Anvil of Apotheosis is ready to start reforging. And a side note, as I kind of touched on earlier, when there were a bunch of souls who are ready to be reforged and this Necroquake wave of energy just smashed into Azyr, things went nuts. Souls that were ready there went ballistic. I won't ruin anything for you, but their job, secondary, is to get wayward souls into coming back to Azyr. And their jobs are either to eliminate or capture those souls. So we're talking Stormcasts that have kind of gone insane. But moving into their more battlefield roles, what we see them currently doing with all the models being released is they are masters of arcane magic. They channel the power of Azyr like few others can. Their ranks were recruited exclusively from spellcasters and wizards in their old lives. And even though they all have the ability to channel energy in some sense, generally only the leaders are the ones who project magic directly, like shooting lightning and those kinds of things. Because others will channel their magic into weapons and armors or trying to assist their neighbors. This makes them perfect for battling in Shyish, where there's lots of spirits, apparitions, night haunt, those kinds of things, where physical weapons don't always work, but maybe an ensorcelled weapon, something that's imbued with energy and power, would be far more effective. And this is kind of where the Battle Tome steps back and really emphasizes the fact that Sigmar anticipated something like this happening. He maybe didn't see this exact line of events going down exactly how it did. He doesn't seem to have much sense of future, but what he could do was assess that Nagash was going to either join his pantheon or he was going to make a power play. And so this is his direct response to saying, this is a contingency plan. If he makes the power play, trying to get in control of everything, this is going to be the kind of warrior that's needed to fight him back. And so it became a waiting game. You don't want to expose your secret weapon. So that's why they were kept back at the Anvil of Apotheosis. And now that that has been destroyed, which obviously I don't think Sigmar foresaw, he plays his cards and the Sacrosanct Chamber enters the fray. Now that's just their general purpose in the army. I want to talk about the various units now. Starting off with the Lord Arcanum. And there are a lot of varieties of this unit in the actual game. You can get him on foot or a bunch of mounts for him to ride on. And these are people who, in their former life, used arcane power for the sake of freeing others, for defending others. They're able to wield the power of Azyr as easily as others breathe, and they're well versed in the nature of the heavens and the soul more relevantly. In fact, as a Stormcast Eternal is struck down in the battlefield, he can snatch their soul midair as it's arcing back to Azyr and throw it right back in their body, and put that soldier right back on his feet into the fight, which is a really cool ability. And like I said before, they frequently ride into battle on a steed that is somehow equally attuned to their type of magic. For example, if they're on a Gryff Charger, that Lord Arcanum may favor speed and maneuverability, so he's able to seamlessly move through the winds etheric just like the Gryff Charger does. On a Dracoline, the sort of brutish-looking Dracoth variant, they're much more headstrong, and so these are going to be more aggressive battle mages who barrel straight into combat, firing lightning as they barrel towards the enemy, firing lightning as they head straight into the enemy. A new creature was introduced to us, and I believe it's pronounced the Toralon, and this is a flying one caught in the skies of Azyr, and this senses and feeds on magic nearby. And what unifies the Lord Arcanums that I find very unique, that they kind of stuck in at the end of their entry, is that they're not really people who give rousing speeches. These aren't the same thing as like your Lord Celestins who try to motivate troops and really get the most out of every soldier. These are the kinds of people who let their actions speak for themselves. They expect everyone to do their jobs, they educate people into what they're supposed to be doing on their battlefield, and they expect everyone to just do what they need to do. Very cut and dry, very focused on what they need to fulfill in this particular mission. Next up, with a very small entry, is the Knight Incantor. And this is second only to the Lord Arcanum. This is almost like their second in command. They too are masters of the storm and their ability to bring it to the enemy. Remember I said mostly the leaders are the ones who project actual magic and lightning and those kinds of things from their bodies. This is one of the higher echelons that can. Their role when they're not in battle is to be at the Anvil Apotheosis, and they draw the raw power of Azyr to the anvil. While the Lord Arcanums craft new bodies for the Stormcast Eternals, Knight Incantors are there bringing the magic to them for that purpose. And with that, they bring that same prowess to the battlefield by drawing magic to them and then hurling it at the enemy. Next are the Sequitors, and they form the basic line infantry of the Sacrosanct Chamber. They're able to channel magic into their weapons and shields, and while they may look like battle mages to us, they don't see themselves as wizards, because they think in their mind they're just on the first step into this world of magic. But of course to us who don't wield any, it looks miraculous. Now functionally they are identical to Liberators. The real difference is their, like I said, ability to channel magic into their weapons. Rather than calling it from Azyr like the other leaders do, where they kind of arc it at the enemy, this is pretty static in whatever they bring to battle. Now, it might seem strange to have just another variant of Liberators, one that can use magical weapons, but again, this is about that escalating conflict in Sigmar's plan for if Nagash enters sort of the grand narrative of battle. Not just order versus chaos, but if we have to fight death too, we're going to need weapons that can deal with ethereal things. So having these magically based weapons, even if someone is functionally like a Liberator, means a huge world of difference. And while they're effective on everyone, they are particularly interesting against ethereal units and demons, things that don't have a physical form in the same way that you and I would. Next are the Castigators. This is the ranged variant of Sequitors, just like the Judicators are a ranged variant of Liberators. Throughout this escalating conflict, the Stormcast Eternals learned very quickly that taking out the undead at ranged was extremely important. It was almost vital, because once they're on you, they're hard to get off. And spirit hosts are much harder to crush in one-on-one combat up close and personal. So they functionally shoot crossbows and other ranged weapons like that, but they don't fire normal arrows. They have what in my opinion is the coolest weapon, and I want you to think of it this way just to describe it for you. Imagine an empty mace, if you will, where you have the long shaft that's almost like an arrow, and at the head of it is a glass jar, so if you look at the shape-wise, it looks like a mace to beat someone with. But inside that jar is the breath of a Stardrake. And with this, the raw magic of the heavens is made into a primitive grenade launcher. They just hurl it like a crossbow at the enemies that are coming at them, and it explodes as if a Stardrake just breathed the lightning into the battlefield. Very cool stuff, and really there's not a whole lot to them otherwise, nor-wise, but I thought that was a very unique weapon, something we hadn't seen before, and I really love it. Next up are the Evocators, or the Evocators, depending on your pronunciation, and these fill the paladin role of the Sacrosanct Chamber. They're more beefy than Sequitors, or Liberators for that matter, and they're also more attuned to magic. If we're kind of making a scale of who's better at wielding magic, your Sequitors are going to be all the way at the bottom, as kind of entry level, and everything above them are going to be more attuned with how to use magic on the battlefield. Now, they do still have a very limited scope of the arcane, but they're able to bless and invigorate nearby friends. To that end, also, they are a heavily armored support unit. They are an anchor that Sequitors and Castigators can kind of form around for support. And with that, their roles are very simple. Draw in magic to the battlefield, support the army, and hit as hard as you can. They can be on foot or ride Dracolines to be more assault-oriented, whatever the army needs. And the last unit here is going to be the Celestar Ballista. Now, these were first designed to defend the Anvil of Apotheosis. However, Lord Arcanums quickly saw uses for them on the battlefield. It was designed by these great warrior engineers, and because of that, it's very streamlined to use, very easy to move and set up for battle. It can be broken down into 2 pieces and moved very rapidly from battlefield to battlefield. And they really just fire a projectile of lightning onto the battlefield, which means they're more reliable than magic, or channeling the lightning yourself. To put it really simply, imagine you just had a cartridge, you put a bunch of lightning in it, and then you carry that around. It's basically like having a shell that's ready to be fired. With that, it's all stored and ready to roll, it's much easier to fire than, say, channeling magic on a whim. Now, there were some criticisms when it came out as to why mages have artillery, because they seem like they'd be different. Like this would be part of something in the Ironwald arsenal rather than the Sacrosanct Chamber. It's important to remember that all of these units represent scholars, teachers, and engineers of magic and technology, because we see a difference, but they don't necessarily do. And it makes sense that those who master the storm would build tools to harness and use it. So why is this chamber so important? Well, it shows us a lot about Sigmar. He really did have this all planned out pretty well. He spent his time wisely calculating how the various other gods could either join the Pantheon or how they could get in the way. I love that their coming into the battlefield represents Order getting hurt in a huge way. Everything we've seen with Stormcast Eternals has been outside Azyr. Right, the home front has always been very safe, while the events of Soul Wars have robbed them of that safety. The Stormcast Eternals aren't necessarily so eternal anymore when they can't be reforged because things were damaged in the Necroquake. So everyone needs to just fight for their lives as if they can't come back now. Because of this, Azyr is in a really rough place right now. With the Anvil Apotheosis out of order, reforging is getting bottlenecked, there's fewer Stormcast out there fighting the war. And the spirits that do come back, sometimes come back wild and insane. So this really represents the escalation of war. Things have gone from just having forces on the ground and then a bigger force, then fighting more troops, throwing more bodies at battles. Now we're talking about the nature of the warriors themselves, the soul within them. Because they represent the rising conflict, meaning things have gotten much worse, so now we need to deploy these guys, but also the stakes of that conflict. Again, they're eternal souls. And I also love the depth of their missions, right? They can act as regular soldiers, absolutely, but they also seek knowledge. They seek cures to the curse, which they want more than anything. But they also have this cool secondary thing where they're hunters and guardians and healers of wayward Stormcast Eternal souls. And this kind of flexibility in narrative and where they can show up gives them a lot of narrative opportunity, and I absolutely love it. And that, friends, is all that I have about the Sacrosanct Chamber. Please join me tomorrow. We're going to be diving in on the Extremist Chamber. If you like this video and you'd like to know more about Age of Sigmar lore, go ahead and give me a like and subscribe, and check out all the other awesome content that I have going on. And if you want to support the channel in a more personal way, please consider becoming one of my patrons over on Patreon. All patrons have the ability to vote for what kind of content I do next, as well as share some cool hobby progress and things like that. And patrons of a certain level are entered into a raffle every time I get a Battle Tome. I don't keep these things around the house, I got no room for it, so I raffle them off as a thank you for all my supporters. So right now I have the Stormcast and Nighthaunt Battle Tomes going out. But if you can't give right now, that's completely fine. I just want to thank you so much for watching this video here with me today. I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.